It's entirely possible that he was unwillingly kept in this home without really any escape himself.
New charges for the 4 Ciders family members found in a home with 16 children. We're looking at the charges related to those children who've been part of a secret investigation before and what could happen to their grandparents.
An adjudication of abuse, neglect, or dependency may result in an order of temporary custody. That's the warning the state of Ohio gave Gary Ciders Jr. and his wife Elizabeth back in 2020. A court document filed in plain English telling them exactly what would happen if they failed to protect their children. They signed it. They acknowledged it. And then, over the next several years, they had 9 more children, bringing the total to 16. 16 children found living in a home so degraded that the county is now seeking permanent custody, which means Gary Jr. and Elizabeth will never get those kids back. But here's what makes this case different from every other child endangerment case you've heard about. The defense attorney for the grandfather...
How do you think your client was victimized?
Well, if you have an individual who is at advanced age and who's in a home, and from all reports that I've heard or seen so far, some of his, whether it was Social Security or other state benefits, are being used essentially to finance the renting of this home, utilities, food, what have you. And if this is an individual who himself is not all there or has significant mental decline or issues, it's entirely possible that he was unwillingly kept in this home without really any escape himself. It's hard to say. Again, this is all prognostication, but it's hard to say what his involvement was. I can tell you this, based on my brief interactions with him, as well as the evaluations that are being done this far, and some other sort of corollary or other information I've received from family and what have you, it appears that there's been a pretty steep mental decline for Mr. Ciders Senior, such that I don't think he was really potentially aware of what was going on at all. So when I talk about someone who himself may have been victimized, it's entirely possible that he was in this house in a state of mental decline such that he was not able to really participate in any meaningful way, whether it was his own finances, where he was at, what he was doing, whether he was there, whether he was actually being taken care of or otherwise.
73-year-old Gary Ciders Senior just stood up in open court and said something that changes the entire shape of this story.
The legal trouble for 4 members of the Ciders family is far from over. For 2 of the 4, the legal jeopardy has gotten much worse. For the other 2, it's improved just slightly. These developments came after the Vinton County grand jury met and returned indictments against Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders for sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. The charges are not related to allegations involving their own children. Gary and Elizabeth were also indicted on 19 counts of child endangering, ranging from second-degree felonies to third-degree felonies and some misdemeanor counts. Their legal situation is incredibly serious, even if the child endangering charges are reduced just slightly. And today, Gary Ciders Jr. appeared in court in Vinton County for a last-minute hearing. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, including the new sex crimes charges he faces. Gary Jr.'s attorney is challenging his mental competency. Judge Rogers raised his bail from $300,000 to $550,000.
He said his client was unwillingly kept in this home without really any escape himself. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Endless Cryme. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. And the evidence in this case paints a picture that looks less like a unified family and more like a fortress where everyone inside was trapped. Let's start with the visual that should define this entire case. In 2023, there is a photograph of Gary Ciders Sr. and his wife Christina standing outside their home on OMR Street.
Dorian, let's start with you. I want your reaction to the indictment, the charges that your client specifically faces. He was facing 16 counts of child endangering. They were felonies of the second degree. Those have now, been reduced. There's a sprinkling of misdemeanors and felony charges in there. Your reaction?
My reaction is this is exactly what I told you would be happening. As I said from the outset, we still haven't received discovery yet. I have been contacted by the prosecutor's office. We have to just do some administrative stuff on the back end in order to make sure the discovery gets delivered properly. But once again, from the complaint to the amended complaint, now to the indictment, the charges have been reduced in number and in severity for Mr. Ciders Senior. This is a gentleman who of all the 4, he has the least serious charges of all of them. And also, when we're talking about the number of counts, I want to make sure that the public is not misinterpreting this as some sort of anything indicative of anything other than the number of people who are in the home. That's why the counts are the number that they are. This is still essentially alleging he was complicit in this one act or incident. But even with that, as we've talked about previously, he is still undergoing his competency evaluation, as well as if he's going to be found NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity. I still have significant concerns about his mental health, about his mental faculties.
They look clean. They look healthy. Their clothes are pressed. They are standing in daylight, and nothing about that image suggests squalor. There is another photograph, believed to be from 2024, posted by one of their daughters on Facebook, showing the same couple outside the same house. They look fine. But when authorities finally entered that home on OMR Street in 2026, they found something else entirely. They found 16 children removed into therapeutic foster care. They found a house that family members themselves have admitted was not the house the grandparents kept. And they found Gary Ciders Senior in a wheelchair, visibly unwell, unable to fully comprehend his own court proceedings. That is the gap. That is the distance between the public face and the private reality. And that gap is exactly what his attorney, Dorian Baum, is now exploiting. The charges themselves tell a story of escalation. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were indicted on sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, charges unrelated to their own children, which raises its own dark set of questions. They also face 19 counts of child endangering, ranging from second-degree felonies down to misdemeanors. The son's bail was raised from $300,000 to $550,000.
The state of Ohio, they planned to take custody of the 9 Ciders children. There were only 9 then, but removing them wasn't an option at that time, according to court records. So the court granted Children's Services request for protective supervision, which allowed a caseworker to help Gary Jr. and Elizabeth complete a case plan and keep their children. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth received a notice that stated, an adjudication of abuse, neglect, or dependency may result in an order of temporary custody. An order of temporary custody will cause the removal of a child from the legal custody of the parent until the court terminates the order of temporary custody or permanently divests them of their parental rights. When a complaint contains a prayer or request for permanent custody of a neglected or dependent child, the parents of said child are hereby notified that the granting of such permanent custody takes from the natural or adoptive parents all rights, duties, and obligations of a parent, including the right to consent to an adoption of the child, to inherit from the child, and the right of the child to inherit from the parent.
He appeared in court, pleaded not guilty, and his attorney is now challenging his mental competency. Meanwhile, the parents, Gary Senior and Christina, initially faced 16 counts of second-degree felony child endangering, but the grand jury reduced those charges. Gary Senior now faces 16 counts 10 third-degree felonies and 6 misdemeanors. Christina faces 19 counts 2 second-degree felonies, 10 third-degree felonies, and 7 misdemeanors. The prosecution downgraded them. The question is why. Here is the parallel narrative the defense is building. Gary Senior and Christina were the only ones receiving government benefits in that house. Social Security, state benefits. Those funds were used to finance the rent, the utilities, the food. They were the financial engine of the household. But if Gary Senior was in mental decline, and his own attorney says he has significant concerns about his mental health, and is pursuing both a competency evaluation and a possible not guilty by reason of insanity defense, then who was actually controlling those benefits? Who was making the decisions? The defense is floating a theory that the grandparents were not conspirators.
Dorian, I want to hit on the competency evaluation part of this. You said it's still in progress. Has that been conducted?
So it's my understanding that Mr. Ciders was transported to the facility, building, etc., where the doctor would be evaluating him. I don't have any results of that. I don't have any reports. I don't have any indications how far along we are with that. Just so people are fully aware, it's not like you're going in for a flu shot and they're like, while we're in here, let's do a strep test, and then 15 minutes later you have the results. This is the kind of thing where you get evaluated, it gets put in sort of the meat grinder of the evaluation process. Eventually a report gets spit out, and that's when we see it. Usually we're talking 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks after the actual evaluation takes place. So the fact that we don't have an evaluation or report yet is not too much of a surprise for me. I will say, though, that I do know Mr. Ciders has continued to receive other medical treatment to deal with some of his physical ailments as well. So this is, again, the same. Just because an indictment was filed doesn't mean that he's not the same individual he was, weeks or months ago when we were talking. he's still a frail, fragile old man who is dealing with significant health issues, both mental health and physical health, and he's not anywhere close to out of the woods on that.
They were resources. They were assets that could be exploited. And if Gary Sr. was unaware of what was happening around him, if his mental faculties had slipped so far that he couldn't meaningfully participate in his own finances or his own care, then he wasn't a co-conspirator. He was a victim. It's entirely possible he was unwillingly kept in this home without really any escape himself. That is the moral refrain of this case. A question the prosecution has not yet answered. A question the prosecution has not yet answered. Now, let's talk about the children. This is not a new case. Children's Services opened a file in 2020 after an online school complained that the children were barely logging on and were essentially illiterate. The oldest at the time was 12. That case was closed. Then doctors found high levels of lead in 4 of the children's systems. That case was closed. Then there was a concern about abuse because one child had bruising on the back of her thigh. That case was closed. Each time, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth completed a case plan and kept the children.
Only Christina Ciders' name came up in the investigation. Gary Sr. and Christina, they looked pretty good in this photo posted on Facebook back in 2023, and even in this photo, believed to be from 2024, posted by one of their daughters on Facebook. Gary Sr. and Christina looked clean and healthy. It was taken outside of the house on OMR Street. So what happened in just a few years, or even a couple of years? Family members have claimed on social media that Gary Sr. and Christina didn't live like this, but apparently they were living like this. And one family member told a West Virginia TV station that they were kept at arm's length from the family. The prosecutor says the family was hiding Gary Jr. and Elizabeth's 16 children.
Each time, the system gave them another chance, and each time, the number of children grew. In 2020 and 2021, there were 9 children. The state planned to take custody, but didn't.
Children's Services opened a case in 2020 after receiving a complaint from an online school that some of the children were supposed to be attending. Records showed the kids were barely logging on to online school and were essentially illiterate. The oldest at the time was 12. That case was closed and another was opened later that year after doctors found high levels of lead in 4 of the children's systems. They were living in this house on Honeysuckle in Cheshire at the time. There was a concern that one of the kids was being abused because the child had bruising on the back of her thigh. That case was closed after Gary Jr. and Elizabeth completed a case plan and they kept the kids. For some of that time that this was going on, the grandparents of the children, Gary Ciders Senior and Christina Ciders, were living with the family and the kids.
They granted protective supervision instead. They allowed a caseworker to help the parents complete a plan. And the parents received a notice, a warning in black and white, that an adjudication of abuse or neglect could result in permanent custody, which would take from them all rights, duties, and obligations of a parent, including the right to consent to an adoption of the child to inherit from the child and the right of the child to inherit from the parent. They knew, they were told, and still, 7 more children were born into that home. That is not an accident. That is a system that failed to act and a family that exploited every gap. But here's the ticking clock moment. If Gary Sr. was being financially exploited, if his benefits were being used to sustain a household he had no control over, then who is accountable for that? And what happens when a man in mental decline is charged with crimes he may not have been aware of? The prosecutor has said Gary Sr. is not a threat to the public. He's free on a signature bond, wearing a GPS monitor. He's receiving treatment for a serious, undisclosed medical condition. Treatment so expensive that keeping him in jail could have bankrupted the county. That tells you something. That tells you his condition is severe. And yet, he is still being prosecuted. The competency evaluation is pending.
It begs the question, do you believe your client may have had any knowledge of what was going on, at least the alleged, at this point, sexual abuse?
So I want to preface all of this with the first thing being that there is a gag order still in place as far as I'm aware. So I can't get too far into the weeds on that as it pertains to anybody else's charges or allegations. As you noted, they are still alleged. And of interesting note, Mr. Getson pointed this out to me the other day. At the very, very bottom of the Attorney General's most recent press release, he was very clear to note that all charges are pending and all people are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So I want to make sure that's out there. But when it comes to Mr. Ciders Senior, number one, he's currently being evaluated for competency. So if he's not competent, I think that really would bear some enlightenment on the question of whether he was knowing what was going on, whether he's knowledgeable what was going on. Because clearly, if you're not competent or if you're NGRI, that in and of itself says essentially you're not aware of what's going on. Number two, I don't know, having not seen any of the discovery, I don't know where these alleged incidents were to have taken place. Just because they all live together, most people don't commit criminal acts if, in fact, they are committed under the watchful eye of other people who are not committing those same acts. So, if I'm going to go rob a bank, I don't typically walk right in the front door and be like, hey, I'm here to rob this bank, and then go take some money. There's usually some surreptitious conduct, there's some, hiding whatever you're doing, etc. So when it comes to whatever Mr. Ciders may or may not have known about, I think it's instructive that the state doesn't seem to believe so, because if so, they would have charged him under some sort of complicity action or complicity part of the statute. He simply wasn't charged. So at the very outset, it appears the state does not believe he had any knowledge, any involvement, or anything else. It appears from the charges that he was effectively charged for whatever they came to find in the house at those lesser charges of misdemeanors and lower level felonies.
The results will likely be filed under seal. His attorney says he won't interfere with that process. He's deliberately limited contact because he wants the professionals to do it without any sort of outside interference. That is a careful, strategic move. If Gary Senior is found incompetent, the case changes entirely. If he is found not guilty by reason of insanity, the case changes entirely. But here's the question his attorney is asking the public to consider. If a man in mental decline is living in a house where his benefits are being used to finance the household, and he is not aware of what is happening around him, is he a defendant or is he a victim? A question the prosecution has not yet answered. The indictment alleges abuse and neglect took place from June 2022 through June 2026. That means this was ongoing while the grandparents lived there. It means while Gary Sr. was in that wheelchair, while his mental state was deteriorating, those conditions existed around him. His attorney points out that the state did not charge him with complicity.
What can you guys tell us about your client? I mean, we don't know anything about him except he's a 73-year-old man. He has at least 16 grandchildren. We know he actually has more than that. But, what do we know about him? Can you tell us anything about his background?
Well, frankly, part of it, and I know Mr. Getson has kind of found some stuff online as well that usually funnels my way. A lot of this is just what we're hearing from either other family members or the community. What I know about him is exactly what I've already shared. He's an older gentleman. He's in serious physical and mental decline, apparently. He certainly has significant health issues. He was a part of this family. He does have other family members, in the community who have seemed to express publicly via either social media or otherwise that he didn't always seem to be in this sort of bit of decline, and he looks worse than he did previously. But a lot of what we know is what we know just as everyone else does from online social media.
They didn't charge him with knowledge. They charged him with child endangering based on the number of people in the home, not because he personally did anything. And his attorney is saying that's because the state doesn't actually believe he was part of it. The state does not believe he had any knowledge, any involvement, or anything else. That is the defense's read of the charging documents. And if that's true, then the question becomes even sharper. Was Gary Ciders Senior a prisoner in his own home? Now let's look at the family dynamics. Family members have claimed on social media that Gary Senior and Christina didn't live like this, that they didn't live in squalor, that they kept their house clean.
I'm going to have a discussion, as will John, with the court about whether this person can even be arraigned, because unless they're just going to do sort of a perfunctory arraignment whereby we enter a not guilty plea on his behalf, which is fine. I don't have a problem doing that. But if he's not competent potentially, how can a person go in and knowingly enter a plea, whatever that plea might be? So again, these are some of the legal issues that we're dealing with. And as John mentioned, we're at a bit of a standstill at the moment.
One family member told a West Virginia TV station that they were kept at arm's length from the family. The prosecutor says the family was hiding Gary Jr. and Elizabeth's 16 children. So the grandparents were isolated. They lived with the family. They were the only ones receiving government benefits. And their condition, physically and mentally, declined so steeply that the man who once stood clean and healthy in a 2023 photograph is now in a wheelchair, unable to understand his own court appearance. What happened between those two images? What happened in those 2 to 3 years? That is the unanswered question. That is what the defense is banking on. The competency evaluation is going to take time. His attorney says these aren't quick tests. They take weeks, sometimes months, to generate a report. In the meantime, Gary Sr. remains free, receiving medical treatment, wearing a GPS monitor. His co-counsel, John Getson, says they're waiting on discovery to know what they're dealing with. If we don't have discovery, we don't know what is being specifically alleged or what possible defenses we do have. This case is moving slowly, But the frame has already been set. The defense has introduced the idea that the grandfather was a victim, that he was unwillingly kept, that he had no escape, and they've done it using the prosecution's own reduction in charges as evidence that the state doesn't really believe he was complicit. So let's return to that warning, that notice from 2020. An adjudication of abuse, neglect, or dependency may result in an order of temporary custody. The state told Gary Jr. and Elizabeth exactly what would happen. They had case plans, they had caseworkers, they had every opportunity to change course, and instead, they had more children. The county is now seeking permanent custody. If they succeed, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth will never get those kids back. That is the consequence. That is the explosive outcome that the legal system is building toward. But for Gary Sr., the outcome is uncertain. Is he a conspirator who watched 16 children live in squalor? Or is he a frail, declining man who is kept in that home as a source of benefits, unable to leave, unable to understand? The defense is asking the question. The prosecution hasn't answered. And the evidence, photographs, court documents, medical evaluations, is still being collected. You can read the indictment yourself. It's publicly available through the Benton County Court records. Look at the charges. Look at the dates. Look at the reduction from F2 to F3 for Gary Sr. and ask yourself why the state downgraded his charges. Then look at the competency evaluation process. The Ohio Revised Code outlines exactly how these hearings work. The public has a right to see how this unfolds. And as we wait for that evaluation report, for the discovery to be produced, for the hearings to be scheduled, the question remains, was Gary Ciders Senior a perpetrator? Or was he a victim held in place by his own decline and the people who exploited it? You can find the court filings online. Read them. Form your own conclusion. And when you do, come back to Endless Cryme and tell us in the comments. What do you think the state's evidence will actually show? If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, share it with someone who follows these cases, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. We follow the evidence. We don't just cover the story. And this story is far from over.